Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Alright, let's get started. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Discovered my wife's, now ex, affair the day she was admitted into hospital. Now years later she can't accept my engagement to my fiancé. If ever there was a prize for the most horrible way to learn of your significant other's affair, I would probably win it and be in its Hall of Fame. Like so many people in this sub, I suddenly found myself as a member of a club that nobody ever wants to be part of. I will never forget the sound of my ex-sister-in-law's voice as she kept saying I'm sorry over and over on the phone while I drove home from a week-long business trip. I was confused and had absolutely no idea what she meant, but only after I managed to calm her down somewhat did she inform me that my wife was in hospital and that I needed to hurry home. My mind went into overdrive as I tried to get more information as well as not crash while I began speeding to get there faster. The only thing she told me is that it was an assault, then cut the call and wouldn't answer when I tried to call her again. A bit of background. My ex and I met in our mid-20s. It was through a mutual friend at a barbecue. At first she seemed almost too good to be true. Not only was she incredibly beautiful, but she was also shy and introverted. It took a while for us to officially date, but once it happened I was over the moon. When we first tried to get intimate she suddenly started crying. Should have taken this as a bad sign. I freaked out and thought it was something I did, but she apologized the next day and told me she was triggered. As it turns out, 2 years before meeting me she was in a long-term relationship and a guy that was abusive both emotionally, physically as well as mentally. He would degrade her during their moments of intimacy, then apologize afterward. She had a flashback but reassured me it had nothing to do with me, so we took things slow as she was still in therapy. It was tough, but because I loved her I believed once we got over this it would make our relationship stronger, and for a while it honestly appeared that way. Fast forward another year and we'd gotten engaged. First time intimacy also happened during this stage. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a house for us courtesy of inheritance from my late uncle. Things were going great and I half seriously suggested we plant a peach tree, important for later on, to signify new beginnings, and she was all for it. We were wedded not long after that and quite frankly it was absolutely amazing. Of course we had our normal ups and downs like every married couple, but I considered us more lucky because she always made it a point to never go to bed upset with each other, and she would always point out gently if I did anything to upset her. Sometime later life basically happened and I was promoted at my job. It meant more pay, but it also meant I would be traveling more for work conferences and business meetings. I noticed she had been getting down a lot more and wasn't being as intimate as before. She would keep her phone close to her and even stopped gently addressing things that upset her. I tried to talk to her about it, but she assured me that she was fine and this was a phase she was going through, and having no reason to not trust her I let it go. She would sometimes go to her sister's place and spend the night telling me she just needed a bit of girl time with her sister. The day I got that fateful phone call was the day she was meant to be keeping her sister company again. I remember rushing into the hospital barely breathing and frantically asking about my wife when world's most understanding and patient police officer sat me down to explain what happened. He told me he was a friend of my SIL and he happened to respond to a domestic disturbance call. He arrived on the scene to find a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the female punching her and she was screaming trying to scratch him. This didn't make any sense to me because 1, this had nothing to do with my wife because we're married, and 2, literally everyone who knew my wife knew she wouldn't do that. He gave me a knowing look and placed his hand on my shoulder, then told me to be very calm because said girlfriend was actually my wife. If it weren't for the severity of the situation I would have laughed in his face, but something in the way he said everything made me believe him. I then was ushered in by a nurse to see my wife, and what greeted me to this day I still can hardly find the words to describe it. I just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, then a doctor came in and explained her injuries to me. The jaw was slightly fractured, her left eye was completely swollen shut and had massive bruising covering half of her face as well as 3 broken ribs. Then the doctor dropped another bomb and told me she was pregnant. I still couldn't understand how this happened. Then I caught sight of her sister. She at first tried to avoid me, but at the persuasion of her police officer friend she told her what she knew. It turns out my wife's ex had gotten in contact with her 5 months ago. He was doing this redemption pyramid step thing where he would apologize to people he has wronged in order to clear his karma. Anyone else be?'s meter going crazy right now. They began talking more, then he convinced her to meet up for coffee and show her he was a changed man. Obviously old feelings resurfaced, coupled with the fact that he appeared changed now. It soon developed into an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice, who told her to take things slow and just get it out of her system if she needed to, which then led to a physical affair 3 months later. She actually told my wife that she should at least make peace with her ex in whatever form it may be, and even offered to cover for my wife once in a while. My sil was in tears at this point and kept apologizing to me, saying that she didn't know about the abuse as my wife never told anyone other than me and her therapist at the time about it. I was numb, I just couldn't feel anything and was absolutely dumbfounded by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up, I was there and she burst into tears upon seeing me. I spent the following months in zombie flight mode. There was individual counseling for her as well as marriage counseling for us at the strong urging of her family. In counseling, she was surprisingly forthcoming about how it happened and how she absolutely hated herself for causing me pain. She mentioned how at one point on her way home from his place she actually fantasized about driving into the river because she smelt like him and didn't want his scent to corrupt me. However, that made sense. She said she tried to end it but was too weak, and only after learning that she was pregnant that it actually woke her up and made her realize that any further contact with this man was toxic to not only her but the unborn child as well, hence went to end things in person for good when he snapped on her. She became a shell of herself and developed a phobia for any other males but me. One point she couldn't even use the bathroom at night unless I was holding her hand. Sad, right? After the baby was born, son by the way, we got a paternity test and he was mine, but the more time I spent with her the more I realized I didn't hate my wife, I actually loathed her. I couldn't see the woman I married but instead saw his leftovers each time I looked at her. I decided to leave because I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret and be exactly like her abusive ex. She begged me not to leave and even made the ridiculous offer of giving me a hall pass as well as slapping her if I wanted to. I knew at this point I had to get out. She was actually very generous during the divorce. She moved back into her parents and signed a very well thought out co-parenting plan issued by the courts. Moving forward 3 years later and I meet my now fiancé by chance. I was in a bookstore with a buddy of mine and we were discussing Egyptian mythology when this beautiful woman approached me to correct me on my pronunciations of the Egyptian gods and cities. Needless to say, immensely impressed by not only her understanding but also by the fact that she is Egyptian herself. We exchanged numbers which eventually lead us to dating. When I finally proposed to her, it was actually in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee, but before I got my answer she ran into the house, then came out with a ring as well. Turns out she was actually planning on proposing herself because she was madly in love with me and she just didn't want any other woman to have me. My son in all his sweet childlike innocence told his mother what happened because he was present when it happened. My ex literally showed up that night in the rain yelling about how could I propose to her, my fiancé, in front of our tree, and that this isn't the end of us. I am completely exhausted at this point. I cannot go NC because she is the mother of my child, but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I convince her to move on, to get over her fear of men and not force me to get a restraining order? Sorry it was long, but I am really desperate. Edit. Wanted to ask a question to the insightful women of Reddit. Something that still bugs me to this day is the fact that she even made time for her ex who took pleasure in destroying her only for her to suffer a much worse fate. Is it normal for the abused to want the attention of the abuser even if she might hate him? Something my ex said once. Edit 2. Forget to add this in the original post. When my fiancé presented me with the ring which she was going to use to propose to me, she had an engraving on the inner band which states "To my Pharaoh." Damn, I love this woman. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback is my fuel to gather more inspiring and meaningful stories. Reaction. I've co-parented somewhat successfully with my ex, WS, for 7 years now. The last time we actually spoke more than a few words in person was in mandatory mediation for divorce proceedings, and we argued so badly the counselor cut the session short and sent us our separate ways. We communicate only when necessary and only directly pertaining to our son. It's effective, but of course requires participation of both parties. Don't try to convince her of anything, don't even have a real conversation with her. Limit your communication to only the absolutely essential information pertaining to your son, as in I'm here to pick him up, and only medical/educational relevant topics when necessary. It's important to keep the peace for the sake of your son. Reaction. I actually forgot to add this in the original post. But before this incident, my ex-Sil was actually a militant feminist. Not that there's anything wrong with feminism, but she always had a tendency to take it to the extremes. After the divorce, she sat me down for coffee and profusely apologized for her role in the destruction of my marriage. She told me she knew how much this relationship meant to my ex but didn't want to stunt her emotional growth or restrict her horizons, whatever the hell that means. She begged me not to give up on her sister, but I simply couldn't stay married. Since then she has become the image of an 80s woman. She's no longer militant and is very reserved, the total opposite of who she was before. Reaction. My husband just had something similar. Not as dramatic as yours. I'm so sorry that happened to you BTW, but his ex was pretty crazy for a while after they split. Constantly overstepped boundaries and couldn't accept he was with me now. What he said was only talk to her if it was about the children. If she tried to talk about anything else he would outright ignore her. Try that. She may not like it at first, but eventually she will give up when she realizes she's not getting anything in return. Reaction. Best way to handle crazy is do not engage. She shows up on your property again yelling at your house. Do not open the door, do not talk to her, just call the cops and have her removed. She keeps doing it, get a restraining order. It is not unheard of to have a restraining order against someone you also share custody or visitation with. It's not optimal for sure, but it happens. Go no contact with her whole family. Pretty obviously the sister doesn't have your best interests in mind. There's nothing but drama for you there, so just leave it alone. Your ex will eventually lose interest, probably once the next victim arrives in her life. Until then, just buckle up and survive the ride. Go as much no contact as you can, just discussing drop off and pick up for the kid. You can't fix people like your ex. Your best play is to just distance yourself from her much as possible. Reaction. Wanted to ask a question to the insightful women of Reddit. Something that still bugs me to this day is the fact that she even made time for her ex who took pleasure in destroying her only for her to suffer a much worse fate. Is it normal for the abused to want the attention of the abuser even if she might hate him? Something my ex said once. It is normal for some. It is a coping mechanism that some people with unresolved trauma go through. I dealt with some messed up things as a young teen, and would sometimes think about dating the persons who hurt me, and imagining a fairly healthy relationship with clear boundaries, and genuine remorse from the other person. I felt a lot of confusion and guilt about these feelings, and it was not something that I ever pursued in real life, so I researched it, and it is really not uncommon. It's a kind of potentially self-destructive coping mechanism. It's not that you like the person that hurt you. There are a few different perspectives on why this happens. It can be a way of trying to make what happened to you feel like it unhappened, like painting over it psychologically. It's a very tempting, and unrealistic, fantasy of healing. This is kind of tied into the psychology of the cycle of abuse, like the honeymoon phase where victims are often willing to pretend everything is alright until things get bad again, because it allows them an emotional reprieve, and they can push the reality of their abuse out of their minds. What I am trying to say is that your ex probably didn't actually like her abuser, but was instead drawn in by this fantasy of having her trauma healed. I hope that can give you a little bit of insight and closure. Reaction. This is really insightful. She has told me she hates how she felt like she needed him at the time, how she knew it was destroying our marriage, destroying me and destroying her. She knew she didn't love him, was and still continues to be adamant about this fact, but he was like a sweet poison she couldn't stop drinking, like someone blindfolded her eyes a bit too tightly and pushed her into cold water. She said getting pregnant with our son was the best thing other than marrying me that has ever happened to her. It tore the blindfold off her eyes and seemingly woke her up, so to speak. She realized she was still his prisoner and wanted nothing more than to be free of him and be the best mother and wife she could be. She said she was a fool for ever responding to his message when he reached out and wishes she could slap some sense into her younger self and scream at herself to run for the hills, metaphorically speaking. Reaction. I'm sorry for what you are dealing with, and sorry for what she is dealing with. I am glad you are building a happier, healthier life for yourself. Hopefully she can find a way to start healthily processing her trauma. Maybe you can talk with her and explain to her that things between you two have changed. Sometimes a time period in your life ends, and you can't go back to it, no matter what. That is okay, and natural, and not something that anyone or anything could change. The love you shared together created your son and the peach tree, and you will never regret that part of your shared history. However, you have changed, she has changed, and your relationship has changed. If she loves you, she should want you to be happy. Instead of chasing something that is gone and punishing herself and everyone around her, she should try to spend her energy healing and taking care of herself, because she deserves to be happy. Processing and letting go of both the pain others have caused her, and the mistakes she has made is the only way she will really be happy. I don't know if you have fully forgiven her, and you certainly don't have to. But I think a big part of the problem is in her mind she made a mistake and all she can focus on is unmaking that mistake, instead of moving on from it. She is stuck in a cycle of self-loathing and looking for where to place blame, and is hyper-focused on finding an external solution to her internal problems. She feels like she fucked up her one chance to be happy. We had something good. I fucked it all up and now I will never be happy. Maybe you can reframe things to be bigger picture. Bigger picture, you don't regret being with her, but you aren't meant to be together. She doesn't need to hate herself for it, but she needs to look elsewhere to find happiness, because she is only going to cause you both pain by once again chasing a painful past. It's possible she's not in a reasonable state of mind at all, so maybe this wouldn't help, but just in case it does. This is probably what I would tell myself if I were in her shoes. She will never be happy until she fixes her internal problems, which is a long process of forgiving yourself and learning to love yourself, and working with your emotional issues and limitations the way that you would work with a child, gently, patiently, and encouragingly. Instead of hating her younger self, she should try to see her younger self as a broken, hurt child, who needs to be forgiven, loved, and looked after. She needs to ask herself what she would want for her son, and treat herself with that same level of love. Reaction. It doesn't sound like you can. Words will not sway an emotionally broken person who is trying so hard to be sane. I do think you could have picked a better spot to propose. Using a relic from your old marriage was a poor choice. Nonetheless, it was your choice and it's done. I think you need to stop talking to her. Use her parents or Sil to arrange with the kids. It just doesn't sound as if she's capable of being of right mind. And considering the family she has, including a sister who encouraged and covered up an affair, it's really not surprising. There's not much you can do. If you've spoken to her rationally and she doesn't stop, then seek legal protection as necessary. Reaction. As people have mentioned, research narcissism specifically in females. Talk to a lawyer and therapist. My fiancé ex-wife is a narcissist and tries to ruin everything we do. Thus, while planning our wedding, we do not tell his children anything. We keep every decision we make about our life from them until after they are set in stone. You cannot co-parent with someone high conflict, you have to parallel parent. I would keep all your communication in written form, using text or email. My fiancé only responds in email, only talks about the children, and waits a solid 24 hours before he responds to make sure he doesn't write out of anger or frustration. I would keep large sections of your life private from your son unless you want your ex-wife showing up or ruining them. I would be prepared to constantly go back to court. Anytime my fiancé and I make an advancement in our lives, he is served with court papers. We have almost 2 separate lives, one with his kids and one without. It may sound like it's not fair to the kids, but what we learned is them knowing details just hurts them. Their mom uses them as pawns, and if they something happy about their life with us, she immediately punish them because she can't us. Sorry you are going through this, it isn't fair. Reaction. If it were me, she would have been served in the hospital. You gave her hope by letting her back for a second. I would have divorced her before she had the baby. You need to sit her parents down and tell them that if she continues to escalate, you're going to start with a restraining order, and escalate until she is committed. I personally think she's gaslighting you on the being afraid of all men bullshit. And if she isn't, she deserves to be alone. The universe is not against her, she is not cursed, she made horrible decisions, and she will have to live with that. She will never be happy with or without you. After what she did to you, you deserve to be happy. Get a good security system for your house, one that records sound. Next time she comes over, take a flash drive to the police. Reaction. What you sow, you reap. Your ex is selfish and foolish because no one would have spoilt their own life like this. I don't know what her foolish sister was thinking to support her and wreck everything. She had everything good going on for her. Really abused women would have coveted her marriage, with a good husband like you. This is normal to expect her reaction, and feel a bit sorry for her on one side because of the abuse she endured, but much more angry for hurting you and her son and herself too by her stupidity. She should have talked to you when her ex was behind her, but she didn't and suffering now. Her story is a lesson for cheaters. Tell your in-laws to help her with therapy, and she has to accept her fate. Establish boundaries. Tell them to stop her from harassing you or you are going to take strict action. You and your fiancé be careful though, because your ex seems to be unstable and angry now. Enjoy your new life now. Reaction. First of all, your story is so traumatic and yet so powerful how you overcame that. It was very sad to read what you have been gone through. I cannot believe this happened to you. Second, like someone said above, I, BS myself, want to punch this Sil in her face. She was apologizing because she didn't know about the ex's abusive behavior? How about she apologized because she basically gave her sister an advice to cheat on you? Like what? Incredibly screwed up. Third, your ex-wife has no right to be upset/happy/disturbed/etc. about any of your actions with your now fiancé. It's only her son she should be concerned with. Like, honestly, she has the guts? I would document everything and only communicate through email, and those apps people suggested on here, assuming you can use that info in court. Wow. Overall, just wow. Thank you for sharing up. Keep us posted. Your story gives me so much hope. You got this. Reaction. Get rid of that peach tree, leave it outside her house. I was going to say put in a trash can to symbolize what she did to your relationship with her. Yeah, get rid of that tree. Does your lovely fiancé know its significance? Place another tree in its place, again as a symbol. If it's big, chop it down. Then do as everyone else said. Such a horrific thing to happen to you. Truly, in her case, beauty is only skin deep. Despite that crap feast, you ended up a massive winner. Time gives wisdom. On my cell phone, so please forgive my many typos. Reaction. Enforce boundaries and limit contact. Don't be friends or make small talk. If she can't be respectful and move on, then any contact that's not related to your son shouldn't happen. Short of that, consider contacting your ex-in-laws and her sister and imploring them to convince her to stop and get therapy. She's the mother of your kid, but outside of that, she really isn't your problem anymore. Her issues regarding men are her own. It's been 3 years since the divorce. If she's still under some assumption that you'll come back, then she's delusional. Watch out for any behavioral changes your kid will have concerning your fiancé. Your ex may attempt manipulating him into driving a wedge in your relationship. I doubt it'll happen, but be wary of it. Reaction. Your ex-wife is very mentally unstable, and so is her family. It's obvious where she gets her issues from. Thank God that you are free from their toxicity and with someone truly special. As far as your ex harassing you, be prepared for the stalker in her to emerge, and with her mental instability, you cannot rule out that she would try to harm you or your fiancé. Protect yourself and your loved ones up. My advice would be to put a restraining order on your ex-wife, and until this mess is sorted out, always be at your fiancé's side so she doesn't get hurt. If she continues to harass you too, then I would report her to the police and the state mental health board. Hopefully, this will all pass peacefully and your ex-wife will stop bothering you. If not, follow my advice. Your ex-wife needs long-term inpatient therapy because she's proven to not have all cylinders firing. Reaction. Your ex-wife hasn't come to grips with the fact that she betrayed you and destroyed not only your trust, but the marriage, too. It is too bad she decided to get involved again with someone who showed he was as a manipulative abuser. In essence, she feared/respected him more than she respected you. And obviously she still had feelings for AP. I would be concerned if her AP would show up again, and be apprehensive about the safety of your child. I would have a hard time ever speaking to her sister again. She didn't respect you either. Get the restraining order. Your fiancé doesn't deserve to see crazy. Reaction. I would call her sister. I would tell her sister that since she played a huge part in my ex betrayed and helped destroy my marriage, then I'd appreciate if she'd make up for it, helping her move on. And I love how she looked you in the eye and told that once she found she was pregnant that she had to get away from him, as if that was supposed to make up for what she already did. Like you're supposed to be thrilled that your wife finally chose you over her affair partner, it only because he sucks. And also, if that was the case, then why was she with him the day she was assaulted? Reaction. Hold up, the sister-in-law not only encouraged the wife to cheat, but offered to cover for her to the husband? What, the 2020 woman? How would she feel if OP facilitated helping her husband cheat? I know you need to co-parent with the ex, OP, but dump that whole dumpster fire of a family. As for the ex, tell her to listen to Taylor Swift's "We Are Never Getting Back Together" on repeat until it sticks. Okay, fine, serious advice. You ask why she wanted an abusive man over you, who always treated her well. It honestly wasn't about the abuse at all. Take that part out of the equation, and ask yourself, why do people cheat? I had a friend that was a serial cheater, and she did it because of the thrill. Oftentimes, she'd mistake the excitement of the danger of cheating with feelings of love. Once the danger was gone, i.e., the spouse found out and left, oftentimes she would get bored, and quickly and mysteriously fall out of love once the thrill of sneaking around and possibly getting caught doing something she knew she wasn't supposed to and getting away with it was gone. Your ex-wife loved her ex once, or she would never have gotten together with him, but his abuse made her hate him. Unfortunately, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. If she had been able to talk about her ex with no feelings at all, no trauma, no hate, no reminiscing about when times were good, no crying when you try to have intimacy, then she was truly over him. But if she got with you while still having any of those feelings, they weren't gone, they were just buried. It is possible to love two people at the same time, but her first mistake was not letting him go after meeting with him for coffee for him to apologize. Once she realized her feelings were still there, she should have cut off contact and not seen him until she was able to think of him without any emotional response. It takes time, or sometimes, just an event traumatic enough that something inside of you snaps and you realize you don't love them anymore, because the person you once loved would never do what the person he'd become had just done. And in that case, it can literally be like a light switch to get over someone. It sounds like she jumped from a relationship with him to a relationship with you before she was fully over him. She needs therapy, lots of it, to figure out why she thinks so little of herself that she would self-sabotage by both repeatedly getting with a guy that abused her and staying with him, as well as cheating on the guy that treated her the best she'd ever been treated, effectively ruining that relationship, as well as how to cope with her trauma so that it doesn't keep affecting her life and her decisions. You need to set hard boundaries, stat. Sit her down and tell her in no uncertain terms that you have moved on and she needs to as well. There is no chance of reconciliation, that's why you're divorced. Tell her you're not looking for friendship, and that you want to maintain a good co-parenting atmosphere for your son's sake, but that's it. Important, do not use the words co-parenting relationship here, because she will jump at the chance for any kind of relationship with you if you let her, in the hopes of worming her way in further. Then tell her that if she keeps showing up to harass you and your fiancé, that you will regrettably be forced to get a restraining order taken out on her, which would mean filing for sole custody, because you can't both co-parent and obey a restraining order at the same time. Once you file for one, not only does your ex have to stay away from you, but you also have to stay away from your ex, or you will be held in violation of the restraining order, and you don't want to have to do that, with the implied "so don't make me." Agree with what another Redditor suggested, definitely keep your wedding details/date top secret, but maybe also hire security for it and the bridal shower/bachelor party/reception and any other event lest she try to ruin it. That way if she gets suspicious or someone lets something slip, she can't make the ill-advised decision to crash to give yet another speech about how you can't get married because she's waiting for you. If worse comes to worst and things go further downhill the more your ex realizes the fiancé is here to stay, you might have to get your restraining order ready, just in case, before the wedding date. I wish you the best. Crazy, right? But hold on, because the next story is going to blow your mind even further.